This happened a few years ago, and sometimes I still have nightmares where I didn't manage to get away. Let me start off by saying that I live in a pretty big city. Lots of bars and clubs, and I have experience with partying. I have been in blackout drunk situations, and this was not that. I no longer go out on my own. That night, I decided to go out with my friends bar hopping. I mainly knew only one of the girls that I hung out with on the regular. The other two were more acquaintances or strangers. I was very outgoing and I loved meeting people, so that was nothing new for me. We had a few drinks at a bar and continued on to the next one, having fun and great times. One of the girls I didn't know well pulled out the party stuff sometime during our second bar visit. I decided to skip it because I wasn't looking to get too effed up that night. My friend said yes, and she and the third girl went to the bathroom. The second girl, let's call her Barb, kept saying that I should go with the two others, but I declined and declined. She got a little aggressive, and I mean after the third time I declined. My friend came back just then, and Barb acted like nothing had just happened. We had some new guys join our group to flirt. I'm in a relationship, but my friend and Barb were not. By then, the second girl had left already. Barb and my friend were starting to get pretty messed up. I went to use the bathroom and to text my boyfriend that I was coming home soon, but I saw that my phone was dead. When I came back, the guys had bought us all shots. I was still pretty sober, so I declined the shot. Barb shoved the shot into my hand, and to avoid a scene, I took it. I started to tell my friend that I was heading home, but one look at her face and Barb and I saw that they were out of it. I was starting to feel pretty woozy myself. So I grabbed my things and their things and started shoving them to go. The guys that bought the shots were protesting, but I wasn't getting resistance from the girls. I hailed a cab. My phone was dead, so no Uber. And I remember putting the girls in the back and telling the driver that we were dropping all my friends at their houses and then going to my address. And then blacked out. I remember dropping off my friend, and then a blackout. And then I was alone with that driver. I was in the front seat and he was holding my hand. I looked around disoriented, took in the sight of him holding my hand while driving. Like my boyfriend would, I saw my wallet in the center cup holder. The meter was off and was telling me that he was taking me to a romantic place. I told him no, please take me home, that my boyfriend was waiting at home. He said something along the lines of, "Stop talking about him, I told you," which to me in hindsight indicates that I had told him already many times. He said he just wanted to pretend for a little and he held my hand tighter. I didn't want to trigger a violent reaction, so I left my hand there and started to reach for my wallet with my other hand. He saw, let go of my hand and took my wallet from the cup holder to his other side where I couldn't reach. I was still woozy and I blacked out again. When I came to my senses, we were parked near a very known romantic and touristy location in my city. Normally this place is packed, but not that night. It's pretty far from anything else too, and it's surrounded by woods. I started to cry and tell him to please take me home, that I wanted to see my boyfriend. I won't tell anyone, please. He looked at me and said, "I will take you home if you pretend you're my girlfriend for a little while." I sat there in shock. I wished my brain wasn't addled. I wished that I had never gone out. I wished that I could see my boyfriend for the thousandth time that night. I said okay and he smiled. Put my wallet back in the cup holder. I took it slowly and put it under my leg. He took my hand and looked out the front window out into the little lake that he had brought me to. He started talking and I don't remember what he was saying. I was trying not to black out again. I waited for him to look at me and asked again, "Please take me home." He said if I let him give me a kiss, but I said no. He looked mad for a fraction of a second and squeezed the hand he was still holding. He leaned in fast and kissed me anyways. I kept my lips sealed tight against him, ready to fight, ready to bite and scratch and to not go down easy. He let go of my hand and backed away. He started the car and started our way back to civilization. I was crying as quietly as possible, trying not to be heard so he would forget I was there and want to touch me, to hold my hand. I waited until we were near enough people that I could bolt out of the car and find another way home. I think he saw me grabbing my wallet from under my leg and knew my intention to jump out at the next red light. But he snatched it again and said that he would drive me. I just nodded, but by then, I didn't care about the wallet, my phone, or anything else. I led jumping out. No matter what, I was going to get home. I didn't know what time it was by then, but I do know there was almost no cars driving in my usually busy city. No buses, no people. I didn't care anymore. He stopped at red light. I unlocked the door and I yanked it open and ran. I didn't look back, but I heard a car appeal out of the intersection. He was running too. My phone was still dead, no wallet, so no money, and I was really far from my house. I was still drowsy and crying. I had no idea of the time and I started walking home. I heard a car pull up near me and started running out of instinct. I heard a woman's voice yell out, "Are you okay?" I stopped and swirled around, and the most beautiful person I have ever seen in this world was walking towards me slowly, hands out in front of her so as not to scare me. I started crying even harder, even more incoherent than I had ever been in my life. She hugged me so hard and asked for my boyfriend's number. She called him and he answered straight away. She started telling him where I was and that I was okay, and that she was taking me home. I cried the whole way back, trying to explain what happened, but still woozy, still freaking out. It was hard, so we drove in relative silence. When we got home, my boyfriend was waiting outside, losing his mind. My savior gave me a phone number to call her when I felt better and drove off. It was 5 a.m. I left the bar at 10 p.m. and that's all I can remember. A week later, my wallet showed up in my mailbox. When I was 16, some friends and I went to an outdoor concert festival type thing. We parked at the mall and took a shuttle to the venue. For perspective, the mall is a 20-minute drive from our homes and the venue is another 20 minutes away in a different direction. During the concert, I ended up losing my friends in the crowd. I didn't care much as I wanted to get to the front, and I could just call them after the concert had ended. Well, of course, I lose my phone somewhere in these sea of people, and don't even notice until the last show wraps up. I search the ground as the people dissipate with no luck. Reluctantly, I just hop on the bus heading back to the mall, hoping to meet them at the car. The car is gone and I start to freak out a little bit. It's 10 p.m. when I head to the bus station to see when the next bus to my city is coming. Just my luck, it happens to be Memorial Day, so no buses until 10 a.m. I borrow a stranger's phone and call the two numbers that I know, my mom and brother. My mom doesn't answer, but my brother does. He basically gives me the sex to suck talk and hangs up. So I'm alone, scared, and a little drunk in a city that I don't know. I try walking, but quickly give up when I realize that I'm basically walking down a random highway toward who knows where. Back at the station, I'm just staring at the map when a stranger creeps up behind me. He asks me where I'm headed and I tell him the truth. He conveniently is going to the same city and asks if I would like to split a cab. Realizing this is my only option, as I didn't have enough of my own, we get in the car. It turns out that he had even less than I did. We barely have enough to get to the heart of the city, which is a 10-minute drive from my house, but at least I know my way home from there. During the drive, this guy gets progressively more creepy. He's aware that I'm 16 and he's 25, but he scoots closer every minute, touching me, insisting that I come back with him to his place, and even writes his phone number on my bare leg. As we get there, I realize the situation that I'm in. We were about to get out into this quiet area at 2 a.m., and the cabbie is going to drive off, leaving no one here to hear me scream. The second that he gets out, I turn to the driver and beg him to take me a few streets further, so I can at least put some distance from him and me. The cab driver hadn't said a word the whole way, but he definitely heard everything. He asks me for my address and he drives me all the way home. The creeper watches as the cab drives off, with me still inside. When we got to my home, I offered to wake my mom up to pay him, but he declined, saying that he's just glad that I'm safe. I broke in through the kitchen window, got to bed, and cried my tears of relief for who knows how long. This happened to me when I was a kid, 10 to be exact. I grew up in a military family and lived in the Middle East for a significant portion of my life. Because of this, we traveled frequently to different countries because of the low cost and proximity. On this particular vacation, we flew into Cairo, Egypt, for a long weekend, and we only lived like 2 to 3 hours away. It was late at night and we were staying at the Marriott Hotel, which had a taxi shuttle service that was supposed to pick us up. For some reason, our driver never showed, so we were forced to take a regular cab to take us there, which took forever to find that late at night. We finally found one that was offering us a pretty good deal. They don't run by meters, instead they just give a flat rate that they choose, and headed towards the hotel. Out of nowhere, another taxi basically T-bones us in the middle of the road, causing us to stop. There aren't really defined roads in a lot of Arab places, so it isn't really that surprising that we got hit. In Arab nature, the two drivers get out of the cars, each yelling that it was the other's fault, and looking like they were going to throw hands. Eventually, they got back into their respective taxis and parted ways. My family and I were completely taken aback. We had been in Egypt less than 2 hours and have already had quite the adventure. We finally got to the hotel, exhausted as it must have been at 3 a.m. by this point. Our driver helped us get all of our bags out and get settled, and told us that he felt so bad about the car accident that he offered to pick us up the next morning and take us to the Great Pyramids, which was on our agenda, for a super cheap rate. My parents agreed and decided on a time for him to come, though I can't remember when. Flash forward to the next morning. Everyone is ready for the day, excited to see how crazy it was going to be. Our driver was outside waiting for us, leaning against the car like someone in an old movie would, right when he said he would be there. I'm a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl that had a deep tan at the time, and being in Egypt, that was a rare sight. When the driver saw me in the daylight, he gave me the creepiest, most unsettling look that sent chills down my spine, even as a 10-year-old. I knew something wasn't right with him. Nonetheless, we got in his taxi and headed towards the pyramids. He continued to try and talk to me and joke around with me the whole ride, something I found to be extremely creepy and bold since both my parents were in the cab. We get super close and there's an entrance that people can go through and walk the long distance to the pyramids. And there's an entrance that taxis can go through. You have to pay to see them, it's strange but true. Our driver keeps making jokes about my blonde hair and blue eyes and bringing up that he could get me into the pyramids for free, so my parents wouldn't have to pay the extra ticket price. We laughed it off and my parents paid him and said thank you and began to exit the taxi. I don't remember how it happened, but at some point after I got out of the car he did too, and he directed me towards his trunk. I was confused and thought that we had forgotten something, so I stayed behind as my parents walked towards the gate to get whatever I thought we had left. The driver pops the trunk, but there wasn't anything in it. He grabbed my arm and put a hand on my back, trying to push me into the trunk, and said, "I'm getting you in for free," over and over again as I resisted. Naturally, I freaked out and screamed out to my mom and dad at the top of my lungs, terrified. When they heard me and noticed that I wasn't behind them, they started sprinting back to the car. When the driver heard me scream, he immediately let go of me, closed the trunk, and drove away just as my parents started to run to me. I was crying my eyes out, terrified out of my mind knowing that a taxi driver tried to put me in his trunk, and drove away the second that I screamed for help. It's scary to think what could have happened to me had he been stronger and more prepared, or faster. He is the reason that I am still terrified of taxis, Ubers, Lyfts, and any car service of that nature. This happened quite a while ago. My lifestyle at the time was very high risk. This story means a lot to me as it restored my much-needed faith in humanity. To explain why this incident meant so much to me, I need to provide a bit of backstory. I live in a really sketchy part of town. The particular building I lived in was a refurbished loft type with a very ugly history. You could still see the damage in the concrete walls from all the gunfire that it had taken at one point. Talking the pizza guy into delivering was always fun. No sir, it's not still a crime scene. Yes, real people live here. There was a local gas station within walking distance. Your typical shady place populated by shady people doing shady things. I had and still have a tendency to be somewhat chatty and polite when spoken to by strangers, especially if I frequent that store and see them often. I wound up making friends with a man named Houston, who had a talent for obtaining recreational plant life. We would hang out and philosophize about life and the like. I just felt like he had a good soul. I was coming home from a bar that I frequented one night. It was a Friday and that area was a popular night spot, so at closing time cabs would line up. I was quite drunk but sober enough to know better than to drive. The cab driver was talkative and I was not. I just wanted to go home and watch the world spin. Almost immediately out of his mouth came some of the most lecherous and disgusting things I'd ever heard. He would arc his neck around while driving, lick his lips and say just horrible things. And the worst part was not only did he have me in a moving vehicle, but he knew where I lived. I had no phone and just enough money for the ride home, and I was terrified. "You want me to pull in so I can lick you?" "No thank you, I'd like to go home and vomit." Being the smartass that I was, I said that. It was as if I hadn't said anything at all to the man though. He kept turning around and reaching out to grab me as I swerved out of his reach. "Hey, show me him, I want to see him." The situation escalated when he started to drive around aimlessly, pulling into dark complexes and slowing down to try and grab me. I had to do something, so I did something that I don't think he was expecting. I flirted with him. I leaned over the front seat and gave him my best drunk and seductive face and said, "Do you want to party?" He stopped, looking blank for a moment before a huge grin widening across his face. "Oh yeah, where do you want to party? You want to party here?" He started to adjust himself and I wanted to rip that frickin' thing off. "No, not here, let's get some beer and go to my place." He agreed and I led him to my local gas station. "Pull in here and I'll go get some. What do you like?" I said sweetly. He said he didn't care and as soon as he parked I grabbed my bag and got out. He sat there waiting. My voice must have had an obvious tone of panic as I asked the lady behind the bulletproof glass, "Is Houston here?" She looked concerned and shouted for him. He came out from the back. I was so relieved and in one hysterical breath, I told him everything. The expression on his face darkened, and he said to me very curtly, "You stay here." I walked to the window as he exited the store. He took 3 steps outside, whistled, and with arms out on either side, he made a "come here" motion. Out of the darkness came 20 really scary guys from both sides. He pointed to the cab and said something that I didn't quite make out. Whatever it was, they swarmed the cab and they tried to flip it over. That cab burned rubber peeling out of the parking lot. The men then looked back at the store window and Houston laughed, nodded, and they disappeared back into the darkness. It was surreal. My jaw was on the floor and Houston came back inside with a grin. I don't think he'll be back. I couldn't thank him enough. He was my hero at that point, hands down. It had started to rain, so he and his friend walked me home under a giant umbrella. There are no words to describe the restoration of my faith in humanity that night. Cliché as it sounds, there really is light in the darkest of places, and kindness in the most unexpected of places. Okay, so about 3 years ago, I went on holiday with my boyfriend and his family. It was lovely. Long hot days on the beach, exploring the cities and swimming in the ocean. But I'm thinking of one particular night. My boyfriend and I had hung out with his stepsister most of the holiday. She's a year younger than us and likes getting drunk. And despite the fact that she annoyed us by following us all the time, we still would hang out with her. So, this one night, she says that we should go and find a club. I state that me nor her are old enough. Only my boyfriend could get in. But nonetheless, we are all walking to the other side of the island to get to this club. We're all pretty drunk. I fell over several times along the journey. So, we finally get to this club and we see all the people leaving it. We didn't realize that it was around 2 a.m. and it looked like the club was shut. A bit disappointed, we looked to a McDonald's and suggested that we refuel there. I go inside and order, but tell my boyfriend and his stepsister that I need some air, and I go outside for a cigarette. I'm smoking when a black car pulls up into the taxi space on the road. I have the idea that we might as well get a taxi back. I'm hurting from falling down and I'm pretty drunk. How much for a taxi to our hotel? I ask him. €10, he replies. Now the problem was, I only had €5. I said to this man, please, will you drive us for 5? We're from the UK and we don't know this area very well. So the man says, for you, €5. My boyfriend and his stepsister come out of McDonald's with the food, and they see me talking to this man. I tell them that he's a taxi man and that he's taking us back. The taxi man is surprised to see them, and says that he didn't know that I was with friends, but come on in and hop in. We were all about to get in the car, me and the stepsister in the back and the boyfriend in the front, when the man requests that I sit in the front. I had wanted to sit in the front anyway, and me being very drunk and stupid, please forgive my lack of intelligence in this story, I decide to just comply and go in the front, despite my boyfriend's protest. So, for the first part of the journey, everything's good. We're all chaffing and laughing together, and the taxi man is joining in. We have music on the radio, and I'm looking out the window at the wonderful ocean side views. Plus, the cool air is nice on my hot, drunken face. We all continue chatting away, and the taxi man is being friendly, asking me questions about the UK and just really making conversation. We all start laughing and chatting away again, and he takes my hand, his right hand on the wheel. Bear in mind, this man is probably about 50, very chatty, so I thought nothing of it. He was being friendly. Throughout our conversations, he's holding my hand every now and then. I was starting to feel a little uncomfortable, but I shrug it off. But he progresses. He placed my hand on his thigh, holding it tight in his hand. I move over on my seat away from him, but he keeps my hand there. I turn around and see the stepsister and she mouths, "Are you okay?" I nod because the man has now let go of my hand. I see the stepsister whisper something to my boyfriend, and they go quiet for a minute. Seeing as he let go, the conversation continues. I can see that we are getting closer to our hotel, and I'm wishing for us just to be there quickly. The man takes my hand again. This time he places it on my thigh, his hand holding mine tightly. I am feeling very vulnerable at this point. I'm wearing a short, tight vest dress, and I immediately clamp my legs together. I'm now silent. I froze. My boyfriend notices and says, "Hey mate, take your hands off her now." The man laughs and says, "Friendly, I'm being friendly." He continues keeping his hand on my thigh. At this point, my boyfriend and his stepsister are saying, "Stop it, pull over." But he says that we are close to the hotel now. I feel sick, the alcohol creeping up my stomach and throat. The man is still holding my hand and he moves it further up my thigh. I'm completely stiff at this point, knowing that if I let my legs relax even in the slightest, things would escalate. But they did anyway. He guided my hand up and with one of his fingers, he touched me. I don't need to say where because you already know. I stare out the window and I'm begging for the car to stop, and luckily it does. I jump out of the car and my boyfriend and the stepsister are looking at me. He touched me, I say. My boyfriend races over to the driver's window, shouting and screaming at him, but the man speeds off very fast. And as he does, my boyfriend kicks his license plate and we see a dent. We go back into the hotel and needless to say, I drink more. The next morning, we are going on a boat trip and my boyfriend's family are asking me if I'm okay, after hearing about what had happened. I say yes because it's true. It's over now and it could have gone a lot worse, and I hope that I'll never see him again. We leave the hotel lobby and that's when I see them. Taxis, white, yellow taxi signs on top of them. Pulled in the taxi ranks, I head over to one. "Excuse me," I say to a taxi man. "Are all taxis white here?" "Yes," he says. "Only taxi colors are white with the sign on top." I feel my insides churning. So, let me reiterate this. A 50-year-old man thought me, a 17-year-old, was alone, and pretended to be a taxi service to get me in his car. So, I was about 13 at the time this happened. It was coming up for my mom's birthday and I had no idea what to get her, so I called my aunt for help. We agreed to meet in town on a Saturday afternoon, after my piano lesson so we wouldn't have to rush. I went to my piano lesson as usual, dropped my books back at the house and went to the bus stop to get the bus into town. As I was waiting, a taxi pulled up and the driver rolled down the window and called out, "Are you going to town, huh? I'll give you a lift." Without moving closer to the taxi, I replied that I couldn't afford one, and the bus would be there any minute. It was, as usual, running late. The driver became insistent that I get into his taxi, and that he wouldn't charge me to go into town. I stood my ground, refusing to get in. His tone became more and more aggressive as he demanded that I get into his taxi over the next minute or so. Someone else arrived at the bus stop, and the taxi driver sped off, swearing at me for not getting into the taxi. I told my aunt what happened when I met her in town, and she asked if I had his license number so she could report the incident. I explained that I didn't want to move closer to the taxi to get the number, and that at first I thought that he was just looking for a fare. My aunt is pretty sure that if I would have gotten into that taxi, I wouldn't have been dropped off in town, but taken somewhere and told me next time this happened to tell them to get lost or I'll scream, and if they try to approach me, to run. I was living in Abu Dhabi when this happened, and I was 17 years old at the time. I have had a number of experiences from taxi drivers out there that could fit on this sub, but this one was by far the worst and creepiest, and I would like to share it all with you. It was Boxing Day 2012, and I was going to my friend's house for his Boxing Day party. He lived in a compound that was a bit of a drive off the island itself, and although not rural suburbs by most standards, this area could be classed as such. These residential suburbs were also still mostly in development. Every block had a new building site, plenty of empty shells of houses, no security cameras at the time, etc. There were no pavements either, just rubble sand patches split by tarmac roads. Now, taxis in the UAE are crazy common. You just put your hand out and one will pull up. And back then, there was less security. There were no cameras or mics in the car, just the meter. I hailed the cab and sat in the front, as a result of a past experience that I had, and we were set on our way. Things start normally. We talked as I normally would getting into a cab. How long have you lived here? Do you enjoy the place, etc.? Eventually, we're on the highway, and after we cross the water to the mainland, he pulls over on the hard shoulder and, without saying a word to me, pulls out his phone and he calls someone. He speaks his native language and he's of South Asian descent, so I have no clue what he's saying. But I ask him politely to continue driving as the meter is still on. He nods, hangs up, and gets going again. This happens a second time, again without word or warning, and now I'm suspicious. This time, I ask him again to keep going, but he ignores me, and he keeps talking on the phone. We're on the highway, so I can't get out for the fear of going splat, not being able to hail a cab or being jacked for jaywalking. After a few minutes, he gets going again, and we pull off the highway, still heading the direction that I needed to be. We reach the first roundabout where we need to make a right turn, but he goes straight over. Everyone knows where this compound is. It's the biggest one in the city. And as a cab driver, there's no chance he doesn't know how to get there. So now, I'm even more suspicious and I kinda have a feeling of trepidation. Like I know this vibe and what might be happening. I ask him to turn around at the next roundabout, but he ignores me. Now, I'm getting agitated and angry, and I ask him to just stop the car and I'll get out and walk. Nope. He literally just ignored me and kept focusing on the road. At this point, I'm shouting at him, numerous expletives, etc., and it's clear that he's got something else planned. Eventually, he pulls off the main road onto a dirt track that led a couple of 100 yards into a massive building site, and he keeps driving down it. He then turns to me and tells me to get into the back seat, and repeats this in an increasingly forceful manner, to the point where we're shouting at each other. At the end of the dirt track is an old little minibus, with roughly 5 dudes stood next to it. I don't notice this immediately. All I care about is that the car is stopped and I'm in the front so I can get out. I'm not let in. Inexplicably, I threw some money at him and jumped out of the car with my bag and started walking away, jogging back down the track. I can only imagine that the earlier phone calls he made were to these minibus men, as when I started getting away, they jumped in the minibus and drove down to catch me, as the taxi turned around to do the same. They all pulled up in front of me like police do in the movies when they stop a bank robber and jump out. The taxi driver runs right up to me, grabs me, and screams at point blank in my face to get in the bus. I can still smell and feel the damp heat from his breath as it touched my face, and the little bits of spit hitting my cheeks. This honestly just enraged me, so I grabbed him by the throat and I pushed him into the car. I screamed something back at him, I can't remember what, and I let go. They all get their phones out and start calling and messaging and moving towards me, so I got out of there as quickly as I could, ran all the way down and back onto the main road, and went to my mates on foot. I know I should have taken their number plate, their ID number, etc., called the police even when I was in the cab, let alone after it happened. However, I was a 17-year-old with a bag of Jack Daniels in my bag, on the way to a party with all my mates drinking, in a country with a drinking age of 21. The paranoia of the trouble from that was enough to keep it quiet from the authorities, although I did tell every family member and friend. So, this happened around 9 years ago when I was 11. There was a girl at school called Amy who didn't have many friends. She was very quiet and honestly, I thought she was a bit strange, but I felt like it would be nice to befriend her. We got talking and she actually turned out to be really nice and we became best friends rather quickly. I got to the point where I spent every weekend at her house and then we would walk to school together. Even at my age, I knew there was something wrong with her dad, Kevin. He was very interested in me, it seems, and always tried to play fight and stuff, which is weird in and of itself. Whenever he was around, I felt weird. He was a short, fat man with gray and white hair. Always had a weird smirk on his face and really wide eyes. It started off with stealing bits of my food when I wasn't looking, and then laughing and making sure to put his arms around my shoulders to apologize. He would always be wherever we were, upstairs, downstairs, or in the garden. He would always lurk about. There was a day where Amy's nan was visiting, Amy's mother's mom, and Kevin kissed her nan on the mouth hello, which was weird. Anyway, but then it turned into the creepiest, sloppiest French kiss. Everyone except me and Amy found it funny. She put on a smile when her family looked over, but I was horrified. Maybe I shouldn't have gone back, but I felt like I had to for Amy. After that, there was a day we were playing in her room and Kevin came in and started an argument over nothing. It got heated and he grabbed the rubbish bag, saying that he was going to throw all of her toys away. Of course, an 11-year-old is going to go mad if they think their dolls are being thrown away, so she was hysterical. We followed him downstairs, where he told her if she spoke to him like that again, she would regret it. It was then that he started to remove his belt. She pushed me towards their front door, which is just in front of the stairs, so we could run out of it. But she was sort of half laughing, as if she was trying to convince me it wasn't serious. I could tell that it was. I got to the door, but when I turned around and waited, Kevin slammed it shut. But not the porch door, and then all I heard was Amy screaming at the top of her lungs. I was so scared, but I didn't want to leave her. I just stood there. Eventually, I found the courage to go back in, and I went upstairs to Amy, who was brushing her doll's hair. She smiled at me, but she had a tear-stained face. There were no visible marks, but all that I could see were her arms, so he could have hit her anywhere. I then felt as if I had to protect her, so I continued going there and I didn't tell my mom a thing. One night, I woke up thirsty and we were close enough for me to go just get myself a drink. So I went downstairs and Kevin was laying there on the floor, in the dark with nothing but tidy whities on, and he just stared at me. It was the creepiest thing. Just the street lamp from outside shining through a gap in the blind lit up the room enough to see. I didn't get myself a drink, I just ran back upstairs. I wouldn't go there after that until I knew for sure he wouldn't be there. And I didn't sleep over anymore. I'm not sure if I've ever told my mom, but I think she would go and kill him. I was talking to Amy recently, and she had opened up to me because she had sent me her mental health assessment sheet. When she was 10, she woke up to Kevin doing something bad to her 15-year-old sister. Kevin isn't her sister's dad, not that it makes it any better, who was screaming for Amy. It also stated that he hit her on a regular basis. The most recent was 2 years ago. He beat her up in front of a friend, and her friend called the cops. I told her the things that I had seen and how I knew something wasn't right. All I know of him now is that he's in a hospital suffering with COPD, and I couldn't care less.